He is a big part of Fall of the Republic. He is a huge part of the Obama deception. He has a doctorate of economics, also a doctorate in history. And we're always pleased to have Webster Tarpley on the air with us. I wanted to get him on. We've got Wayne Madsen coming up the next hour and a host of other big scandals. We'll also get his take on Bankergate. I'm calling it Bankergate, and I want people to understand that this is just like Copenhagen. This is just like ClimateGate. If we, the alternative media, really point out the full fraud of this, force it into the mainstream media, this could bring them down. We have Napolitano on Fox saying Geithner could be indicted for criminal fraud. We even have Ed Schultz, the Democrat, on MSNBC saying the White House is in trouble on this. Geithner clearly set policy at the head Fed office in New York. That's the head office. He clearly set policy and continued it as Treasury Secretary. Notice they swapped. You had Geithner in at the private Federal Reserve, while the former head of Goldman Sachs, both Goldman Sachs executives, was getting over $200 million for himself and got a waiver from himself to do it. Paulson. Then Geithner, when Paulson left, Geithner rotated out of the Federal Reserve chairmanship of New York into the Treasury Secretary position. And here's the key. And he continued the policy of 100%, 100 cents on the dollar for fraudulent derivatives that they created. We have the 5-part series of McClatchy newspapers with their own internal emails where they knew it was fraud, knew it was going to implode, told people to buy it, to blow out their competition, Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers, and others. So they would be left as top dogs because they had their people all over government. So they made money on the way up, money on the way down. Now, Webster Tarpley, I've got him on with us. I want him to break this down. For Geithner to come out and say, like Sergeant Schultz in Hogan's Heroes, I know nothing, to have him saying this is asinine when you have this continued clear racketeering by Goldman Sachs in government, out of government. Webster has always said in both my films the last year, the key is AIG, is their front holding company to divvy out the goodies worldwide. So, Webster, I want you to go through what the bankers are doing and to explain to them. They've stolen the 28-plus trill, several trillion of that directly from the bailout. But now they want the New London Kilo land grabbing under fake environmentalism, austerity, taxes. In Australia, the same banking group is laying about half the land off use, just telling farmers, get off. It's going to the banks. I just played a newscast earlier. No compensation. Excise taxes, sales taxes, value-added taxes openly going through Congress. Total raping. States going bankrupt. Being loaned money like they're third world countries by the same banks. The banks won't loan to Main Street. They want the implosion. Either we expose these frauds, have them indicted, expose them, audit, and then abolish the Federal Reserve, give the power back to Congress, and have a true package to get the economy going and to loan to Main Street. It's over. We're already into the spiral of inflation. Might as well print, as you've said. I tend to agree with you on that facet. You've got the floor. I want you to scientifically go through the history of this, the clear crime, where we're going. Webster Tarpley, economist, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Alex. I would propose let's go back to the issue at the center of these emails, and it is the question of derivatives. First of all, as you correctly point out, financial derivatives, paper based on paper, side bets on markets, and above all, AIG, the world's largest insurance company that set up during this past decade a hedge fund in London, a deregulated trading operation in London. And, of course, in London, the regulatory environment is non-existent. There are no rules in London. New York is bad. London is even worse. So AIG set up a hedge fund in London that issued a total of $3 trillion of derivatives. That's about, what, 1/5 of the gross domestic product of the United States, more than the gross domestic product of France. So remember, derivatives had been completely illegal from 1936 until 1982 under a New Deal law put through by Roosevelt. Derivatives were simply illegal. And it took a period of several decades of work by Phil Graham and Wendy Graham and Alan Greenspan and Bob Rubin and Larry Summers, who's in the White House today, making policy for Obama, to somehow rehabilitate derivatives and bring them back. And by the end of all that, a couple of years ago, we had reached the amazing sum of a derivatives bubble in the world of $1.5 quadrillion. That is to say, 1,500 trillion, of which 3 trillion were in this AIG hedge fund. Now, when this panic started, it was clear that AIG hedge fund in London, AIG Financial it was called, they could not pay. These were credit default swaps and collateralized debt obligations that connected this London hedge fund of AIG to the entire New York, London, and European banking community. So in the middle of this crisis in the fall of 2008, we have, of course, as you mentioned, Hank Paulson of Goldman Sachs teaming up with Obama and also with McCain and also with Palin, because she supported it too, to bail out the banking system with $700 billion.
And Glenn Beck, and he's now supporting new taxes to pay the bankers.
Yeah, right. The entire corporate, globalized, pro-Federal Reserve, pro-Wall Street gang, they were all there cheerleading for this bailout, right? The TARP, the Troubled Asset Relief Program, which is still going on. So the question was then, where would this money go? And this was kept secret, and that's the issue. But let's jump ahead. Where did the money go? What is it that they're hiding? Well, you mentioned the sum of about 29 billion. That is referring to the United States banks that were paid off by the AIG hedge fund in London, thanks to money from the U.S. taxpayers. So again, the idea is the U.S. Treasury under Paulson and then under Geithner, but under Paulson is where it starts. They give the money to this hedge fund in London, and the New York Federal Reserve with Geithner superintends this process, and it goes through something called Maiden Lane 3. And Maiden Lane 3 is a company that they set up for the purpose of funneling money to AIG. So who gets the money? First of all, Goldman Sachs gets $13 billion. It's interesting because at this point, the head of AIG is a guy called Liddy, and he's also from Goldman Sachs. Ed Liddy from Goldman Sachs is getting the money from Hank Paulson.
They've got their people everywhere in every administration for over a decade setting up this mother of all heists.
And this is Goldman Sachs alias Government Sachs. So they've taken over the U.S. government, in effect, because they've got their alumni are all over the place, including Bob Rubin and his protege, then Larry Summers. So Goldman Sachs gets $13 billion. Merrill Lynch, on the way to bankruptcy and being absorbed, gets $7 billion. Bank of America gets $5.2 billion. Citibank gets $2.3 billion. Wachovia gets $1.5 billion. So that's $29 billion to pay off credit default swaps at 100 cents on the dollar. Now, these credit default swaps and collateralized debt obligations were worth about zero. They might have been worth 2 or 3 cents on the dollar.
Yeah, the banks just made these up for themselves.
Yes, they're manufactured out of nothing. It's basically issuing insurance without meeting the legal requirements to issue insurance, which include capital and so forth. But now it gets worse. We've accounted for about $29 billion so far. But there are foreign banks. It's not just Wall Street banks, not just Goldman Sachs.
And we've got $50 billion paid to those, and there's evidence that those banks then paid it back into the Goldman Sachs crowd again.
Partly, but yes, and I think that's one of the key motivations. But let's just give the list of criminals in this case. We have Société Générale of France gets $12 billion. Deutsche Bank of Germany gets $12 billion. Barclays Bank of Great Britain, $8.5 billion. Union Bank of Switzerland, UBS, $5 billion. So this is actually more. This is about $38 billion. If you put this together, we get up to the fantastic sum of $67 billion.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was $50 billion. $67 billion. Excuse me.
$67 billion by my count, which is about 10% of the entire TARP. 10% of the entire Troubled Assets program goes to Goldman Sachs or the partners of Goldman Sachs. And, of course, we want to stress, Citibank, Bank of America, these, of course, are institutions that are just as evil.
But if you're running a criminal op, though, you want to use one gang, and Goldman Sachs clearly were the captains of this piratical fleet.
Yes, they have been able to get more political influence, but this thing is all intertwined. So the idea was then that this should have been stated. All of the information that I've just gone through, the names of these banks and the billions that they got, should have been stated on a filing which AIG was legally required to make under the Securities Exchange Act of 1933. In other words, they were supposed to tell the Securities and Exchange Commission, okay, SEC, here are the banks that we paid, and here's how much we paid them. AIG, under Liddy of Goldman Sachs, sent a first draft of their SEC Schedule A filing, I think it's called, to essentially Geithner's people at the New York Federal Reserve. And the New York Federal Reserve and their lawyers told AIG, don't make this public now. Let's hide this for a while. Let's keep this under wraps because we don't want this to come out.